Welcome to the 54th episode of our monthly webinar series. We started these with, as an indication or a desire to create a space to ask the clumsy questions and to practice bravery and humility and to have conversations. And so we're really grateful for the community you've helped us build around them. If this is your first roundtable, all you need to know is that they are designed for contribution, not consumption. As a reflection of that intent, the panelists have been given about 25 minutes total to make some introductory remarks, and that allows 30 minutes for discussion, which will be facilitated outside of the chat, or from the chat, I'm sorry. I usually start by understanding why this topic at this time by these speakers. For years, states, localities, and stakeholders have focused on implementing best management practices to reduce nutrient inputs to the Chesapeake Bay. The strategy has certainly yielded some successes, but the Chesapeake Bay Program Science and Technical Advisory Committee report entitled Comprehensive Evaluation of System Response, or CSER, pointed out the need for accelerated progress. Why the need for acceleration? We still have a target of 50 million pound reduction of nitrogen needed to meet the current target, and it has to come primarily from non-point sources. It has taken over a decade to generate less than 6 million pounds of nitrogen non-point source reduction. So new financial incentive programs such as Pay for Performance or Pay for Success programs offer opportunities to encourage adoption of more effective practices that land managers may not consider under standard cost share programs. And what specifically do we mean by that? Really, the success really comes out of the modeled BMP outcomes produced by the Chesapeake Bay program. And while that modeling is backed certainly by a lot of science, there isn't a full verification to guarantee water quality is improving after a practice is installed. And these pay for outcomes program is seen as a way to ensure actual results while also exploring new technologies that can offer a more targeted approach. As one can imagine, such an approach needs a range of expertise to make it work. What's the financing setup? What's the actual effectiveness? And how do we achieve it under current regulatory constraints? And thankfully, our panelists cover all three, although they wanted to know who was what, but that's interesting. So we have Robert Booz from Penvest, or the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Investment Authority, to give you an example of just how much financing is in that program. In April, the Shapiro administration announced the investment of $243 million for 32 drinking water and wastewater projects. So that's I'm going to say he's our finance person. Dave Goshorn, who I've known wonderfully for a very long time, loves fishes and almost anything that lives in either Maryland's Chesapeake Bay or coastal bays. Starting in 1992, working on striped bass, chief of living resources, and then finally doing the cat herding that is necessary to see that everybody's cooperating in bay restoration. I've seen him in a meeting answering emails, texts, and questions from the audience all simultaneously, so he's pretty good at this. And finally, Jonathan Rack, who is Chief Policy Advisor for the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, just recently described himself as a recovering attorney, but he's got extensive background in real estate and land use, regulatory law, and regulatory development. And so with that as a brief introduction, I am going to turn it over to Robert to start our panel.
All right, you should be seeing my screen. If I could get someone to confirm for that for me, and the audio is working. I got some head nods. All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me today. Again, my name's Robert Bose. I'm the Executive Director for the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Investment Authority. To date, we've primarily managed what's referred to as the State Revolving Fund. And really, that's a revolving loan program primarily. There is some grant dollars, but primarily loan dollars that finance clean water projects. Pretty much if there's any type of clean water project, whether it be wastewater, drinking water, non-point source, green infrastructure, stormwater, a variety of things, agricultural best management practices. If there's anything associated with clean water, we can pretty much find a way to fund it. And really today, what I'm focusing on is our latest program, the Clean Water Procurement Program. And essentially what this program is about 2 years ago, going on 3 now, there was legislation that was introduced and adopted by the Wolf administration that primarily set up the Clean Water Program. And it's a pay for performance, which is a different model, pay for performance, to address nutrient impacts primarily in the Chesapeake Bay. And really what the pay for performance model does is it shifts risk, financial risk, from the Commonwealth to the successful participant in the program. And the idea behind that was, and why that was engaged, was to see if there's innovative ways to address nutrient reductions, sediment reductions within the Chesapeake Bay. Is there a market out there that can drive innovation and reductions by itself and shift the risk from the Commonwealth to those that are actually implementing the reductions? And that's done through this pay for performance model. The funding to date in the Commonwealth anyways has primarily come from the initial $22 million was from ARPA funding. And now there's codified in the fiscal code $6 million to the Clean Streams funding each year to do the pay for performance model. But we can also accept dollars from the federal government, other grants, agencies, gifts, contributions, returns on the program through investments. And there's just a variety of avenues that we can utilize to grow the fund. But the nice thing is now that it is codified with that $6 million, we can now plan ahead. It's not a year-by-year program. We can really plan ahead on how to grow the program over the coming years. Essentially, anyone or any entity can qualify as a participant. You just have to make sure that you qualify and that you're not in bad standing with the Commonwealth, you're not in default somewhere, you don't have a violation history. Essentially, you got to be a good actor and don't have anything on the books that would otherwise prohibit you from participating. And you can get some verifications as part of what you're proposing to do from the Department of Environmental Protection, who we work with for implementing the program. Penvest is primarily the bank and the people that issue the request for proposals for the projects, and our partners at the Department of Environmental Protection are really verifying that the reductions that are being proposed will reach those reductions and that they are verifying them, that they are in fact achieving those reductions prior to us making payment on anything. Types of projects that are eligible, basically any practice that is part of the Chesapeake Bay nutrient tracking tool that's utilized within the Commonwealth. Any practice, as long as it can qualify for a reduction under that. And again, I'm not going to go into the technicalities of why that tool is used. We're just the bank, but this is what our Commonwealth has decided to utilize. And the types of things that wouldn't be eligible are, projects that were previously funded by state or federal programs. Basically, you can't double dip. You can't do reductions that you sold as part of any type of nutrient trading, again, to prevent double dipping, that type of thing. But generally speaking, if it's a practice that is able to be quantified utilizing the Chesapeake Bay nutrient tracking tool, then it's a practice that would be eligible for participation in the program. We're taking requests for proposals. We do an RFP. This is a little different when it's coming to pay for performance. We're actually doing a solicitation. This isn't an application. It's not a grant application. We actually issue a request for proposals, and people submit proposals on a form for us to consider that have to meet certain program requirements, which are part of that RFP. It'd be like soliciting a contractor to do construction work. It'd be like soliciting a company to provide materials. We're utilizing that solicitation process as part of this pay for performance. So people are going to be assembling these proposals on how they're going to achieve reductions, and then quantifying for us how much they would like to be paid for those reductions as for our consideration, which is a little different than models that have existed to date. But we do it once a year. First Wednesday in March of every year is when we accept responses to those requests for proposals. And really, you can go to our website on locating the program details, the nit and gritty about it. I'm just covering high level stuff at this time because of the time constraints for our other speakers as well. And but all our information about the Clean Water Program and the fact that it is a solicitation, you're not applying for a grant, you're not applying for funding. What you're doing is you're saying, here's what I can achieve, here's what I can do. And if I do that, then you need to pay me for these reductions at X cost for our consideration. It also goes through the bidding instructions as part of that request for proposals and to meet what the minimum requirements are to be able to participate in that solicitation. And to date, program results, we've done a couple rounds over the last 3 years. We've had 9 successful proposals that we've engaged in the contracts for the reductions to be achieved. Value of those contracts is $27.9 million. Basically, it comes up to be about 89,000 pounds of nitrogen reduced annually, 14,500 pounds phosphorus reduced annually, and 4.2 million pounds of sediment reduced annually. And the reason why I'm concentrating on utilizing the word annually is because some of these practices have a useful life. It could be 12 years, it could be 15 years, it could be 20 years. And to compare things on a apples to apple basis, we're really looking at what reductions are being achieved each year over the life of those BMPs. So annually, this is essentially what we're achieving over the life of the BMPs. Our next round, again, is March 4th, 2026 for applications by 5 p.m. And, I'll leave the questions once our other speakers have a chance to speak, and I look forward to that conversation. But again, it's a little different being a solicitation and not an application. And it's done this way to basically see if the market can produce reductions at a cheaper rate. Getting people to participate, looking for efficiencies to do more at a greater value so that they can be successful in achieving an award from Penvest for participation in the program. And we look forward to seeing more people participate in the program, for it to be more competitive, and ultimately to see more reductions be done at a least cost alternative. So with that, I thank you for the time, and I'll leave it back to Denise, and we'll go to the next speaker.
Thanks, Robert. And I really appreciate you kind of making such a distinction about the solicitation. I think that's really interesting. Next up is Dave Goshorn.
Thanks. Let me try to share my screen.
I think Robert might need to stop.
Oh.
There you go.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you all. Again, I'm Dave Gossamer with Maryland Department of Natural Resources. I'm going to talk about what we've been doing in Maryland. And up front, I just want to thank, and I have no idea if they're on here or not, but the folks who helped put this together, specifically Sarah Lane, Natalie Snyder, and Dana Reese, all from Maryland DNR. They're the ones who helped me with this presentation, but even more importantly are the ones in the trenches actually doing this day in, day out. And so I just want to give them some recognition up front. I already have 4 slides. I want to start out, as this first one says, talking a little bit about the fund that we're using to implement pay for success or pay for performance. I'll probably use those terms interchangeably. That's the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund. I want to talk a little bit about what that fund is, what it's set up to do, how it's operated since its inception, and then how more recently we're pivoting to use at least some of it for under a pay for success model. So the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund is Maryland's primary non-point source restoration reduction fund. It was established by statute in 2009 and is funded primarily from, or not primarily, but is funded from taxes on gasoline and rental car taxes. It varies, the amount varies from year to year, but it's in the $50-ish million range. And as originally written, it was intended to fund the most cost-effective nutrient and sediment reduction practices from non-point source lands. And so it is a competitive grant process. Cost-effective is key. So it's not just the location and the practice that are evaluated for cost effectiveness, but also how much money the partner can bring to the table. So that's key as well. That's the primary focus. That's how it's operated for most of its time since 2009. We've added other considerations over the years, including focus on benefits other than nutrient and sediment, such as habitat, climate resiliency, environmental justice, and there's a large emphasis on engaging stakeholders in the process. But it's a pretty as designed originally, pretty standard process. We get annual grant applications, we review them, we work with the top ones, and then we provide, we enter into an agreement or a grant to provide funding for them to do stream restoration or tree planting or wetland creation or whatever the case may be. It's been in effect for a little over 15 years now, and at least I think, and I think others do, it's worked quite well. We've done a good job at, there's components of it that are constantly seeking to learn from new ideas and what we've been doing and incorporating them into the future grants. That's worked well. It's been very integrative, bringing a lot of partners together, a lot of nature-based solutions together. So that was certainly part of the intent at the beginning, and that's worked well. That's not perfect. A couple things we've learned in the process is it was designed as a classic sort of grant program to award the funding and then let it go. There hasn't been much of a emphasis on, or any emphasis, frankly, at the beginning on, follow-up. A lot of these projects require some maintenance. We need to make sure some of these landowners need to enter into agreements to protect the land. There's been that we could have anticipated more and increased our enforcement of that. We've had some challenges from time to time in implementing aspects of this program that are truly competitive, as opposed to first come, first serve type of handouts. I will add, this is a Maryland, I should have said this at the beginning, this is a Maryland Department of Natural Resources managed program, but we work very, very closely with our primarily our sister state agencies, Maryland Department of the Environment and Maryland Department of Agriculture in implementing this program. In terms of what we've accomplished, again, this is over about 15 years. We've granted a little over $780 million from the trust fund. We've leveraged another about $315 million. So if you do the math, it's a little over $1 billion since the program began. We've reduced over that period of time a little over 5 million pounds of nitrogen, about 235,000 pounds of phosphorus, and over 185,000 tons of sediment. But we've also, as you can see, a wide variety of other, in order to accomplish that. over 368,000 linear feet of streams, over 1,700 riparian acres forested, and so forth. I also want to point out at the bottom left, almost 40,000 volunteers and students. The focus, of course, is nutrient sediment reduction, but we take engaging with our public and creating stewards as a key parts of that. But we haven't until recently really focused on pay for success. These have been standard processes. You're going to create a wetland, restore so many feet of stream, and as we all know, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So in 2022, Maryland passed the Conservation Finance Act of 2022, which allowed us to begin entering into pivoting where we are paying for, in concept at least, defining specific outcomes and then paying for achievement of those outcomes, assuming that that's what happens. Again, it takes the risk out of the state that we're actually going to achieve what we want to achieve. It pivots the risk to the people that are promising they're going to do this work. That was in 2022 that we received through statute the authority to implement pay for success or pay for performance. However, what we found was that while we now had the authority to do that in legislation, we didn't really have the state, as any good state, we didn't have the bureaucracy was in place that didn't really allow us to easily do that through our procurement processes. We were not allowed to enter into contracts directly with private entities that were doing this. We had to go through nonprofits that added a complexity, a third party that confounded this, and also our grants are relatively short term, 2 to 3 years, and many of these benefits require more time than that for trees to grow, for wetlands to begin functioning, and so forth. That being said, we have so we did pass a law this past year in 2024. I'm sorry, to bring our procurement processes in line with what we're trying to accomplish. That went into effect October 1 of 2024. So it's been less than a year. We are now adapting our RFPs to take advantage of that. In the meantime, we have, with the previous limitations, entered into several pay for performance projects. You can see them listed here. I'm not going to read them all, but that have been reasonably successful. And you can see a picture's worth 1,000 words. You can see the stream on the right is one of these projects. Stream on the left, not one of these projects. And where they're coming together, you can see the obvious difference in water quality. So some of they do work, but the process has been very cumbersome. We're very anxiously looking forward to applying our new authorities, as I described a second ago, in this upcoming year, so that we can take what we've learned and really apply it large scale. And I'll just stop there because I think my time's pretty much up, and let's go on to the next.
Great, thanks, Dave. And we'll just pivot immediately to Jonathan, and then to discussion. So Jonathan, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think Dave needs to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Screen sharing, and I can try mine.
Okay, it should have stopped, I hope.
All right. Okay. So thank you for the chance to talk to you about this Pay for Outcomes non-point source nutrient reduction pilot program. I've got about a dozen slides. I'm going to quickly try to get through those and leave plenty of time for our questions. I'd like to try to emphasize the differences in Virginia's program, which is the newest one, in comparison with Pennsylvania and Maryland as I go through it. I think the first significant difference is that this is a one-year pilot program. It was funded by the General Assembly last year, And initially, we were required to commit all of the funds before the end of this fiscal year, at the end of June. We recently got an amendment that allows us to have some non-reverting funds, but it's much more of a pilot approach. So there we go, next slide. So it's a $20 million appropriation, and similar to the other programs, it's based on actual pollutant reductions or removals. The budget language that provided the appropriation gave us our guardrails in terms of what rules we were to use to give out this money. Similar to the other states, we're looking for payments when performance is verified. We use the phrase pay for outcomes simply because that's what the General Assembly used in the budget bill. The budget bill also included ranking criteria for us to use. And the first and the most important, based on our conversations with the legislature and the secretary on Chesapeake Bay Commission, was the cost per pounds of nutrients removed. So we assigned in our scoring criteria 60 of 100 points for cost efficiency. And then there are another of other criteria that you can see on the screen that we distributed the remaining 40 points. I think it's important distinction, particularly from Pennsylvania, that we chose not to use a procurement or RFP approach. We found that for a one-year pilot program, that the delays and some of the additional requirements that come along with our Public Procurement Act didn't align with the priorities that the General Assembly included in the budget language. So we did it more on a grant type of request for applications. We issued the request for applications in February. It's limited to projects located in Virginia's Chesapeake Bay watershed. It is open to basically any applicant. We decided to set a minimum award of $500,000 and a maximum award of $7.5 million, primarily to keep the number of projects that we had to administer at a reasonable number. We are allowing for a 5-year payout, even though the funds are obligated in this first year. One of the differences in our procedure or our evaluation of the reduction in nutrients, we did apply the Chesapeake Bay delivery factor. I think that may have been applied in the other programs, I'm not certain, which basically recognizes that a pound of nutrients in the headwaters of the watershed is going to have less impact than a pound of nutrients in the main stem of the bay, at least for the main bay water quality. So we did use the delivery factors, although we did have a provision for not taking any discounts for delivery factors in locally impaired waters. We also applied what we think is a somewhat novel approach in evaluating the pollutant removals, and we calculated them using a present value analysis. And this allows us to look at projects that may have a very long-term or perpetual outcomes, like permanent land use conversions with conservation easements, and compare those on an equal footing with projects that might have a year or 5-year or 2-year duration. And so by using or calculating a present value, sort of using the same methodology as a financial analysis would do, we can put it all in the same footing. So we adopted that as part of our analysis. We did encourage in the request for applications an emphasis on innovation, and we specifically decided that we would not limit awards to best management practices that are already approved within the Bay program. And we recognize, and the Secretary recognized, that this may mean that we may be paying for some nutrient removals that we don't really get credit for under the Bay program initially, but we felt that it was important, again, to encourage both cost effectiveness and innovation. We received 31 applications, 16 from the private sector, 4 from the public, and 4 from nonprofits. The total requested funds were over $112 million for the $20 million appropriation. We had a range of cost per pound of nitrogen, which was our keystone, from $15 a pound to over $6,500 a pound. So a very vast range in terms of cost efficiency. Um, and we went through the evaluation process, which in our case included a very detailed review by a technical review panel consisting of subject matter experts from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science and Virginia Tech. And they helped us particularly in evaluating proposals for new technologies for which there were no expert panel reports or Bay model cast type of scoring. They also confirmed the pollutant removal estimates for all applications, made some adjustments in a number of cases, and provided us with what we described as a success confidence score that helped us evaluate the likelihood of these removals actually happening. Obviously, we're not going to pay for removals that don't happen, but it does tie up funds that otherwise could be distributed to other projects. So we were concerned about that. I think we also, we also held back about $1 million from the $20 million appropriation, both to have a reserve for overperformance of projects, potentially another small round, and also to pay for administrative costs and technical panel review. We just about 2 weeks ago announced the selected awards, and we got, I think, a really interesting diversity of types of projects. We selected 9 different awardees, and you can see that they range on this slide, and there's a second one, from land use conversions. The most cost-effective applicant was for converting cropland to growing giant miscanthus grass. We also had some very cost-effective applications for the disconnection of septic systems and diverting those flows to very high efficiency public treatment works. We had a number of land use conversion and forestation proposals. Some fascinating ones, a new technology to divert urine from waste streams and treat that separately to get very efficient removals. Our largest award was for oyster reef construction. Also a very interesting application to interact with dairy farmers using mass balance calculations to reduce their nitrogen contributions. And then finally, again, a very innovative proposal to capture gaseous ammonia in chicken houses and divert that from deposition into the environment. This is our score sheet, our top ranked applications. You can see that the cost per pound of nitrogen removal ranges from around $15 a pound to the high of $91 for the oyster reef. We did have, as I mentioned, these other score criteria that included some co-benefits, and that's why, for example, the oyster reef, which had a relatively higher cost, scored successfully within our ranking. And then finally, just a slide showing some of our experience in terms of cost per pound of removals under our water quality improvement fund. You can see that our average cost of $32.73 is definitely on the low end. It's higher than some of the point source pay for performance that we've done in the past, but certainly quite low for non-point source. So with that, I'll stop and look forward to questions.
Oh, thank you, speakers. You did such a marvelous job. Abby, I can't turn on my video, so excuse me if you can't see me, but there's, I'll start actually with some questions from the chat, and then I'll move on. We got quite a bit of questions submitted prior. So I think, Jonathan, I'll let you answer first, and then please, the other panelists, chime in. I won't ask you each to respond, but please do if you have something to add. So Larry Sanford asked 2 questions. And I think, Jonathan, you go ahead and answer this first, especially given the specificity of your program. But does the lack of upfront implementation support favor big ag or other larger entities?
So I think what I'm understanding from that question is since we're not providing capital initially, although we did have an option for some applicants to ask for seed money, but by and large these are self-funded applications, and I think it probably does favor those with either resource to capital or access to capital or the ability to utilize existing land, particularly for the land conversions. That was a consequence of the primary emphasis on cost per pound of removal and frankly on success confidence, because we didn't want to be in a situation where we were paying for a project and then that project would fail and then we would have lost those funds. We wouldn't have gotten truly the pay for outcomes.
Other panelists, do you want to go ahead and add, since you're all kind of have it formulated differently?
Certainly. The program is designed to shift that risk when it's pay for performance. So any entity that's going to be successful in this sector of pay for performance is going to have access to or obtain some upfront funding. However, anytime you're looking at financing, there's a variety of ways to achieve things. You can put forth a proposal, have demonstrated that you've been able to successfully implement practices, be successful, at least in Pennsylvania, be successful in the solicitation, get a contract, and once you have that contract, you can go to a local bank and use that as collateral to help do that interim funding or financing until that you complete the project and can actually then submit for reimbursement once you deliver the reduction. So there's financial ways to maneuver that very aspect, but it is a different model, and you do need to be able to have some access to capital to participate. And that's one of the interesting things that we're interested in seeing grow over time.
Robert, let me just ask you a follow-up to if I get that right. So if you go to another place using that contract to get the financing, do those financing institutions, do they know how to deal and assess a contract like that and an investment like that? Are those processes in place?
Certain banks will. Certain banks have different levels of financing and participation in whatever model and sectors they're trying to engage. A local hometown bank, probably not. But maybe some larger banks that have significantly more resources and expertise might.
Denise, and I'll just add, in Maryland, obviously these folks need funding to get going. We're not taking an all one way or the other approach. We recognize that we have the flexibility to provide funding up front, like a significant amount of the funding up front, maybe 50% up front, so they can get going, and then through the agreement we'll pay back the balance over time as the whatever outcomes we agreed upon are demonstrated to be in effect. I'll also add that we have not to date, because of the way we've been set up, worked much with private investors. And so the hope is that this new model will encourage that engagement that we haven't had previously. So.
Oh, great. Thank you. Here's a question I think all of you can answer because it showed up in a number of places, but it's in the chat from Lauren McPhillips. If I'm understanding right, it sounds like in most cases, verification is largely through calculator tools for nutrient and sediment credits. Are there any sort of field verification elements of the programs? And
in Pennsylvania, there is. It's a combination of the tool but then also verification that the practices were in as designed and proposed such that those reductions are achieved. And we require that certification from our Department of Environmental Protection before we will issue payment for the reductions.
Mhm. But that is still, if I'm understanding that right, Robert, it's just that the practice has been installed correctly. It's not, for example, water quality monitoring in any.
Well, that it's not just installed. You don't get the reductions by just installing it. You get the reductions over time for it being in place. So the only time we are actually paying isn't at the point of time of completion of a project. We're only paying once those reductions have been verified and essentially are deliverable to the Commonwealth as being achieved. And then at that point in time, you'll get payment for those reductions. The reductions have to be realized before you get payment.
Okay.
And I'll just add, in Maryland, yes, we agree up front with the applicant, the successful applicant, what the criteria are going to be. So everybody's clear on what they're going to be required to do in order to get payment. We do require field, verification as part of it. So it's not just a model.
Yeah, Virginia is similar to both Pennsylvania and Maryland with those assurances. We also have quality assurance project plans for every successful awardee. And then for the particular technologies that are not within the Bay model and don't have these sort of proxy like acreage type of calculations, we are requiring direct sampling. And for example, on the urine diverting flush toilet, we'll have actual grab samples and laboratory assays. So it'll vary from project to project.
So to be clear from all three of you, it sounds like the only one that's really got water quality derived, demonstrations of performance would be for something that doesn't already have, isn't represented in the normal BMP sort of things. By field verified, you mean that the practice is installed and working, not necessarily that you've got water quality monitoring data for performance, correct?
Yeah,
Correct.
that's correct. And one of the decisions we made early in our process was essentially to recognize CAST and the expert panel reports and not try to go behind them to do direct measurement. We just felt that since the Bay program had validated them, that we needed to go along with that.
Okay.
And I'll just add, Denise, I think part of the trick here, speaking as a good state bureaucrat, is laws and regulations like to processes like to have very defined. Here's how you're going to do this. Here's how you're going to do that, and that's part of the challenge we ran into, and why we required two different bills to get us to this point. Is trying to find the sweet spot balance between what you're trying to achieve and giving the flexibility, because all these projects are different. They are, we're in the early stages of this, trying to figure this out. That's not easy to do in a state bureaucracy, but that's the challenge.
Yeah. This is a great question. I think all three of you, it'd be great to address. Does the approach of rewarding results take away needed funding to implement projects? So how are you looking as a state, right? You've got programs that are basically paying to implement practices, and now you've got this model where you're going to pay for performance. Are you struggling with the balance between those two approaches? And do you think pay for performance is actually taking away something from those long operating implementation programs?
I can go. I don't think it's taking away from existing programs. I mean, this is new. It's an effort to see if it works. Does it provide additional value to the effort? We're still in the very early stages of pay for performance and what it's going to look like, where it's going to evolve to. It's just another model to a variety of financial models to do it. But right now, if you look at the overall dollars, right, that are being committed at a high level. In each state, I'll speculate, compared to what dollars are being utilized for pay for performance. I don't really see them competing at this point in time. It's just looking for new innovation, new models, to achieve the reductions everyone's trying to accomplish. So at this point in time and at the scale that it's operating, in my mind, it's very small compared to the larger picture.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean, short answer to your question, Denise, no, is the answer. We're applying the same criteria. It's more, are we paying them up front or after we have documented results? We're at the end of the day, we are accountable to the funding that we receive, that we're getting results out of it. So I think moving down this road is the right way to go.
Yeah, ours is as I noted, a pilot program, so it's very much proof of concept. I think what I would add is that our approach on the pilot program was to emphasize above all other factors the cost efficiency. And the question that it raises, which we haven't answered or tried to, is should we look at programs and have allocations by sector, which has been a more traditional way, or should we, going forward, look at focusing more of our total spend on simple cost efficiency? And that's an answer that don't have yet.
Another question that's come up is, and I think one of you I think two of you actually sort of implied it, but to what extent are you able to incorporate additional benefits other than nutrient and sediment reductions? For example, so if you're 60 out of your 100 points, Jonathan, is looking at cost per pound, do you have a way to actually incorporate additional benefits in those programs?
Well, in our scoring, we did include points for habitat and resiliency, local government engagement and participation, and those sorts of co-benefits. But because of the emphasis on cost efficiency, they made a difference sort of on the edges. But the primary reason why the projects were selected was their low cost.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned, our original statute back in 2009 was focused exclusively on nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, and that has been expanded over the years to include other benefits, habitat, for example, climate resiliency, but also engaging partners. That does make it a little bit more challenging because you can relatively easily quantify pounds of nitrogen, phosphorus. These others are less quantifiable, so it's more of a judgment call. But we can absolutely, and we do absolutely include them as well.
And we include co-benefits as well in our ranking and scoring of proposals. Obviously, the more co-benefits and tangibles realized, the better score you're going to get and be more competitive with your proposal.
What about uncertainty? Right. So yeah, I mean, in the financing world, right, everybody deals with sort of uncertainty, but how are you all sort of thinking about that or talking about that in your program? Because like, for example, we know there's uncertainty in the modeling, right? When you say BMPs can differ, same BMP can differ widely in their results depending on where they are, for example, geography. So what do you incorporate considerations of uncertainty when you look at these projects, or do you sort of give a high, low, medium level of uncertainty to the performance part of it? Do you deal with uncertainty in these processes at all?
Well, when it comes to uncertainty of the value of a best management practice, we're going with the Chesapeake Bay nutrient tracking tool, and that's been approved by the Bay program. So, I'll leave any uncertainties relating to that to the folks that work on that. But we're going with what the tool says. From a finance standpoint, dealing with uncertainty, what happens if a practice gets washed out as a result of a storm or a hurricane? This program is intentionally designed that the risk is on the person who puts in the proposal.
Mm.
At the end of the day, if the reductions aren't delivered, they don't get paid.
Mm-hmm.
So managing risk and uncertainty is really on the person who's putting in the practices now, as opposed to, say, a grant program. Grant programs now, you put it in, you get the money, and that's it. But are you getting the value for the dollars that were put into those practices if something was washed out, sold? With the performance aspect of it, you don't get paid for those reductions unless you actually deliver them. So applicants have to look at how they want to manage their risk to assure the delivery so that they can be made stay whole with the contract.
We're also trying to mitigate uncertainty through the ability to shift funds from one project to another, so that, for example, if a project underperforms, they're not successful, for example, in the number of septic disconnections or whatever the criteria is for proposal, that to the extent that they underperform, we're able to shift those funds to other projects that might be overperforming. And we think that will hedge to some degree that inevitable variation in accomplishing the removals that are predicted.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I'll just add, uncertainty is, I think, inherent in what we're trying to do here. We just need to accept that up front. The key is making sure that both parties are clear. What's the level? How are we going to decide whether you get paid or not? I mean, to be blunt, what are the criteria we're going to apply given the uncertainty? And if you meet that criteria, then you'll get paid.
Great. There's so many good questions, and I'll just remind everyone that what we do is all the questions that didn't get a chance to be aired here, we actually send to the panelists and give them an opportunity to answer, and then we send out those answers to you with a link to the recording. So everyone will have a shot at getting their question answered, and thanks for the quality of the questions. One of the things is, what convinced each of you that a pay for performance or pay for outcomes program was necessary? Was it what the traditional way of doing voluntary cost sharing was not working, or what was the signal that sent you to doing these types of programs?
I think one, we didn't come up with the program, the legislators did. They codified it, and we're just on the implementation side of it. But I think what drove the legislation was the prospect of, will a market drive more reductions in a more timely fashion for a lower cost? And I think this effort is trying to prove that out as another way to deal with these nutrient reductions. Are there innovations in technology that can be implemented to drive those costs down, or implementation in a more timely fashion? So, as you can imagine, legislators get solicited with all kinds of ideas. And at least in Pennsylvania, I think since nutrient credit trading has been engaged across the states, that program has probably evolved enough now, and the discussions have evolved enough now that this is just kind of the next step in the effort, just to try and gauge the value of it. So
I would just echo that. I mean, we all know we have a Bay Agreement, outlines all kinds of things we're going to accomplish. We've been at it for a long time, and I don't think anyone would disagree that we've been making progress. But when you're investing all this money, both federal and state, invariably it comes down to the question of, are we getting what we're paying for? And I think putting the money, providing the funding after we have proof that it's accomplished what we want to accomplish is just, frankly, it's common sense. in a state bureaucracy, it's not all that simple to implement, and that's what we're wrestling our way through right now. But it's at least from my perspective, it's the way to go.
Mhm.
Yeah, we too didn't choose it. There was legislatures and some really effective advocates who got the program approved. But we were excited and happy to be able to do it, particularly because we'd been seeing in some of our other grant programs that cost efficiencies ranged well over an order of magnitude. You know, some grant programs that were paying tens of thousands of dollars per pound for removal of nitrogen. And you know, it's troubling in terms of looking at those different programs to see that much cost with lesser benefit. And this, I think, helped us really focus on that cost efficiency aspect.
So we have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you all a kind of parting question. And we talked about this a little bit. If you had it to do all over again, setting up a program, what might you do differently?
I think the biggest thing in Pennsylvania is not that we would do anything differently, but you have lessons learned. This is our third year into it, and each year we make tweaks to the program. And where we're really finding, I don't want to call it a limitation, but where people are struggling to understand the concept of pay for performance. They still have the mindset of, a grant program. And it's not that. It does work differently. And trying to get people to get that concept has been difficult. And we're expanding our educational outreach and materials to understand that. But the biggest thing where I think if we were deficient anywhere in standing up the program was realizing how many different ways there are for people to calculate reductions, and they don't all mean the same thing, so that we can compare them apple to apples for purposes of responding to the solicitation to be successful. So each round, we tweak our language in the solicitation to really get folks all on the same page of how it needs to be calculated for purposes of this program. Sometimes you'll get people saying, I'll give you this many reductions in a lump sum. Some will say, I'm giving you these reductions over 5 years or 10 years. And, how do you compare that to a best management practice that's at 20 years? So we're really looking at, pound cost per pound reduced on an annual basis, but getting everyone in our materials such that we receive the information in that form has been a learning curve for us. And we're going to continue to work and evolve that. So that's where we need to grow and do better.
Yeah, I'm interested in Virginia's present value approach. So, Dave and Jonathan?
Just two things real quick. One is I already alluded to in my presentation is that in retrospect, we should have not just thought about the endpoint, but the process to get to the endpoint. So we had to go back with some cleanup that delayed all the implementation a couple of years. But I think also going forward, while we now understand what we're trying to do and we're all excited about it, I think we need to probably be looking for reaching out to potential applicants so they understand what's on the table, what's changed. I mentioned engaging investors that in the past haven't been part of this because they weren't allowed to be part of it for one reason or another. So I think outreach is probably an important next step.
Thanks. And Jonathan, you get to wrap it up.
I'll be real quick. I think we would think long and hard about using the Bay delivery factors again, since the benefits of the nutrient removals in the waters where they occur affect and benefit the folks who live around there and the environment. So I think we might consider not using that.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Thank you so very much. That was really wonderful, a range of perspectives. So again, we'll be asking you some follow-up questions, and thanks to everyone who came today. Wonderful questions. I really appreciate it. And get ready for June 11th for our next one. Thank you.